Hello, this is Gonzalo Lira speaking to you live, and this is the Roundtable, episode number 31. And thank you so much for joining us. I am joined by the estimable Larry Johnson, late of the CIA. So be careful.
Yeah, really late.
How's it going, my friend?
Good. Get my
It's so
phone
good
out
to
of the
hear.
way here.
Yeah. By the way, we were supposed to have Phil Giraldi on. Unfortunately, he won't be able to make it. I will be changing the thumbnail later on after the broadcast. Unfortunately, he's under the weather, but don't worry about him. He's perfectly fine. But unfortunately, it just couldn't be helped. And Phil, if you're listening, we wish you the best. And of course, you're welcome to come on as soon as you get better. Feel better, get well. That's the priority. But you are more than welcome. And in fact, I'd be delighted to have you on again with Larry, of course. And so, yeah, that's all we have to say, and wishing Phil the best. Now, Larry, see, before the broadcast, I was telling you I was freaking out about the dirty bomb that the Zelensky regime is threatening to use, and I begged you to talk me off the ledge. So do your thing of talking me off the ledge.
Well, the dirty bomb is let's call it the Hollywood phenomena. It appears a lot more deadly and more lethal in the movies. The reality is it's nuclear material that's attached to a conventional explosive, and it can provide some limited contamination. But it's not gonna level a city. It's not going to render a city completely, it's going to turn into Chernobyl. Let's put it that way.
Right.
So, and in fact, put it in this perspective: if folks could survive Chernobyl, they can survive the dirty bomb. But it's worrisome from the standpoint that it's because it is, let's call it its sexy character, that it is so alarming, and because it evokes fear in people, that just doing it is designed to try to trigger another reaction. And that's why I wrote the other day, just comparing it to what happened in Syria back in 2013, when British and American intelligence officers working with Islamic radicals set off what was claimed to be sarin, and it was in fact, and try to blame it on government Bashar Assad, and blaming, and again, they wanted this to become a pretext that would allow the United States and the UK to react militarily, send forces into the region, more regime change. Fortunately, Obama got cold feet. U.S. military pushed back and said, no, we're not going to do that. And then the intelligence later came out that it was absolutely not the government of Syria. And I had, way back then, I had actually a front. I was working inside a secure facility, Fort Bragg, had complete access to secret material. So I was taking a look at every morning and afternoon at that time, there was a briefing that the Defense Intelligence Agency prepared for the Joint Chiefs of Staff and for the Secretary of Defense. And so I thought, hey, boy, surely the intelligence community picked up on this. So I looked, like the day before, nothing. 2 days before, nothing. So there was no prior reporting on it. Now, that's important because the United States, along with Israel, were monitoring the chemical weapons capability of the Syrian army. And the Syrian army used what they call binary weapons. And binary weapons are where you take two, let's call them inert elements, you mix them together, and all of a sudden they become deadly, lethal, and they have a shelf life of about 36 hours. Well, you would see that activity through a variety of intelligence collection methods.
Okay,
None of that was going on.
Okay, I'm going to have to interrupt you for a technical reason. Apparently, you're going robotic. So could you do me a favor? Could you refresh the page? You'll drop out and just refresh the page, and you'll pop back up on my screen, and I'll bring you back on because you're doing the chat. Yeah, sorry about that, chat. One of those technical snafus. Anyway, now that we are alone, yes, I've been trying to make myself as sexy as possible for you guys, as I said in my previous comment in chat, because, you want to have a sexy host, right? Or do you want me to be like ugly? Like, I don't know, Rosie O'Donnell. Hi, Larry. How's it going? I was
Is that any
vamping.
better?
Why don't you give a count to 5, please?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Yes, outstanding.
Okay.
Chat, give me a +1 if Larry sounds a lot better. I'm sorry. So I interrupted you. You were saying?
Yeah. Well, so just looking at what would have been the normal indicators that the Syrian government was in fact preparing a chemical weapons attack, they weren't there. And then, and it was interesting at the time, the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency was Michael Flynn, and I give Flynn a lot of credit because there were enormous propaganda efforts being made to portray this the same sort of nonsense you hear about Putin today. It was being said about Bashar Assad back then. Oh, he's going to be gone any day. He's got cancer. He's he's hanging on by a thread. It was all Western lies. So jump back to where we are today. Russians have seen this playbook before, and they got out in front of it. Because the way you get out in front of it is you call it and say, okay, we know what you're doing, and we're not going to let it happen. Because if it does happen, there are going to be serious consequences. And, everybody's caught with their hand in the cookie jar and are acting outraged. Oh, I'm not trying to steal this, or and
You're
they
stealing it. Yeah.
So this is, I think it's one of those watershed moments in this whole event where they're calling out the West, because the West has been involved with a series of terrorist sabotage, and you got to ask yourself, why are they doing that? Well, they're doing it because they're weak. These are not the actions of strength. If they were actually wiping the floor with Russians and on their way to cruise Moscow, they wouldn't be doing this nonsense because they're winning.
Yeah.
And that's the thing to pay attention to. They're losing. They know they're losing, and in that desperation, they're looking to do some desperate, stupid things.
Yeah, that's my fear. That these people, and their hysteria and their fear and the panic at everything going south. I mean, everything that they implemented on February 25th and thereafter has just gone ass backward. The blowback, as you guys who train with firearms always say, total blowback, and in the intelligence community, everything has gone wrong. Everything that they wanted to inflict on Russia is happening to the West, to Europe and the Americas, and the Americans rather. And go ahead.
Well, no, I just said I have, again, firsthand experience. I watched when the overthrow of Noriega was being masterminded, and it was my branch, Central America. I was in the Central America branch of the Middle Caribbean Division in the Office of Africa Latin American Affairs. So the analyst was actually, he was read into all of what the direct operations was doing, and because they were trying to coordinate what was being published from intelligence analysis with what was happening on the ground.
Hang on a second, Larry. I hate to do this. I hate to interrupt you again because I'm very interested in what you have to say. But unfortunately, Chad is telling me that you're going robotic again. So perhaps the best thing
I'll
to
just
do.
cut the camera. How about if I cut the camera?
Yeah, right there in the button. Just stop camera, and then we'll be set.
That.
Yeah, it'll take a few seconds for the audio to straighten out, but hopefully this will be better because ultimately, I mean, you guys, I know that you chat and want to see the sexy me. Larry can't compete. Larry, I was talking to chat while you were away there briefly that they all come to see the sexy Gonzalo. Not the ugly duckling Larry.
Who wants to look at the old guy?
Well, no, it's brains before beauty. You're the brains, I'm the beauty. That's how it works here. So anyway, as you were saying about Noriega,
I was watching. Every day the United States was trying a variety of things to provoke Noriega into reacting. And what was interesting at the time, Noriega wouldn't take the bait. And Noriega is just another example of when he was useful to the United States. He was our great friend, our big buddy. We looked the other way with his drug trafficking and other stuff. But when we get tired of it, then we turn around and, turned on him. And, what I really fear for the United States is all of this karma coming due, because we got a lot of bad karma on that front of having, to tell people, hey, we got your back, and then the next thing you know, yeah, we got their back, we're stabbing them in the middle of it.
Yeah, yeah,
I think that's what's in store for Ukraine as well.
yeah. I mean, my thinking has been for a while that Zelensky's, sell-by date, I think it's come and gone. I think that his usefulness has evaporated because you correct me if I'm wrong. With Zelensky in power, there's no real way for a reverse gear for the West. They can't back out of this thing. But if he were to be removed, say in a military coup, then they could say, oh, well, what are we going to do now? Oh, I guess this military dictatorship in Ukraine will just be on their own, and we'll just wash our hands of the whole Ukraine mess. I mean, you see my way of thinking? And
Yeah,
so
no,
I would think that, go ahead.
No, I think you're right that they can't. Um, a coup would provide another pretext for the United States and NATO, for that matter, to reevaluate its relationship with Ukraine, as the diplomatic speak.
I love that phrase, reevaluate our relationship.
Yeah,
It's kind of like the words that you say to a girl that you're about to break up with. You know what I mean?
yeah, this is exactly the same thing. But this, uh, what's becoming increasingly clear, I think, over the course of these last 10 months, is the ability of the United States to control events is becoming less.
Yeah.
And there was always sort of the assumption that we had things under control, and it's looking with each passing day that it's just the opposite, that we're going to be reacting, the United States leadership will be reacting more to events and not able to anticipate, and in the process, they'll be hanging on to a runaway horse, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, my thinking is that the numbers that have been coming out insofar as Zelensky regime forces, Kiev regime forces, is astronomical. I mean, people are saying, no, it's way over 100,000 killed in action. It's closer to 200. There have been some far out numbers like 400,000, but I don't think so. I mean, I actually emailed you privately some numbers that I've been seeing that seem to go in that direction, but then I walked it back because I realized I was way over my skis in that regard. But certainly, it's comfortably over 100,000. And of course, I know how horrible that phrase sounds. I don't mean it in that way. But over 100,000 killed in action, and likely twice that number incapacitated. You're talking 300,000 men who are out of commission. And the fact that there's so much talk of prisoners of war saying that they heard, like in certain sectors of the front, it was all Polish or all English or even French. It seems that it's over. I mean, militarily speaking. And with all of these offensives over the past 7-8 weeks that have just decimated the Kiev regime forces, the issue becomes, when is enough enough? When will the military say, no, we have to preserve something, because the way things are going, we're going to wind up literally without an army. I mean, very literally without an army. And on top of that, the Russians coming in with 300,000, the mobilization of allegedly 300,000. I personally think it's more. They've already put 100, 150,000 troops in the combat area. I mean, they're shipping them in by the bushel, by the trainload. And so it's like, enough already. What's the point of this needless destruction? That's been my position since the get-go, that this is just pointless and needless, and it's a needless loss of life that is irreplaceable. And that's why I hate the Kiev regime. I got to tell you that right now, and I don't care, because they're throwing away lives of the flower of Ukraine for nothing except maybe an occasional headline here and there, which I find just despicable. Sorry for my rant, man.
Yeah, no, I understood. Let me find the right sports analogy. This is Ukraine is in the position trying to play soccer with 4 players on the field, or playing baseball with only 6 of the positions filled. And what I mean by that is they've got ground forces, but their ability, they don't have a lot of tanks. They certainly don't have enough armored vehicles, personnel carriers, so they're resorting to using, Uncle Bob's truck
Yeah.
or van.
Yeah,
So
mounting a
they're
machine gun
using,
on them. Have you seen those videos?
yeah, yeah. I
Hmm.
mean, this they're like the Somali rebels running around with they call them technicals.
Yeah.
So they don't have that kind of reserve. They don't have air power. I mean, as soon as a plane takes off and gets outside of its airfield, the Russians are shooting down. They have no fixed wing combat aircraft that can provide any kind of sustained close air support. And close air support means the plane can fly over, hit the enemy side with either strafing rounds or with bombs. There's something to disrupt defense force that is opposing your guys. They don't have that. The helicopters are even more rare, for getting shot down. So and all of that comes into play in terms of being able to maintain a logistics supply to the front. So I'm just, I look at this and wonder how can they sustain any kind of advance, because it's basically it's relying entirely on individuals without the other accoutrement that the Russians have, and the Russians have, you know, they have the full complement. They have the combat fixed wing aircraft. They have the helicopters. Uh, they have more artillery. They have more of the multiple launch rocket systems. So, they take it all together. Uh, I, I I just don't see how Ukraine stays in the fight, and it looks like we lost. Uh, is that I'm checking the chat? Is that what everybody else is saying? Gonzalo has gone missing. There we are. Okay. Well, I will try to keep carrying on here. Um, the As the winter now progresses, and as the ground freezes, um, it is going to make it more easy for the Russian forces to maneuver. And I think that's what they're waiting for, to be able to both get the reinforcements in place on the line, and then have the ground in a condition that they can reinforce it and then move effectively. Um, this I've been struck by we've got the constant warning that the offensive against Kherson is going to take place any minute. And I know, in fact, 2 weeks ago, I had an acquaintance, I'll call him. He's very much tied into the neocons, and he was telling me well, on a Friday, he said, "You just wait till Tuesday. You're going to see," because he was fully anticipating, uh, 5 days later, a major offensive, a major attack by Ukraine.
Hey,
And
how's
you're
it going?
back.
Yeah, thank goodness that you kept on going, because what
Yeah.
happens is that when my internet dropped out, sorry about that, chat. And what happens is that when the internet drops out, the program still keeps going until the last guest leaves. And I was hoping that you wouldn't leave, because I'm very interested in the audience hearing what you were saying, and what you had to say. And so obviously you were continuing. Thank goodness. I'm sorry. What were you saying? And sorry about the
I'll just,
interruption. It obviously
I
couldn't be
I
helped.
was recounting a recent anecdote of a friend, an acquaintance, really, not so much a friend, who's tied in with the neocons. And
Yeah.
this was over 2 weeks ago. He was
Okay.
saying it was on a Friday. He said, "You just watch, boy, on Tuesday, man. Those Ukrainians are they're gonna really wipe up the world. They're expecting a major offensive, and Tuesday came and went, and nothing happened." So there is this delusion on the part of the West about what's going on the ground in Ukraine, where they apply a standard to the Ukrainians that is, they're like superheroes. They can do
Yeah.
anything. They can conquer any mountain.
Well, they
But
believe their own
reality,
propaganda.
Yeah.
It's as
Yeah,
simple as
but
that.
the reality is just the other components that are supposed to be there. I just did a piece last night at my blog at Sonar 21
Hmm.
about HIMARS. Remember this early on, the U.S. is introducing the HIMARS. It's going to be a game changer, you know.
It's always a
And,
game changer, but it's always the
and
same damn game with the same positions, you know,
in
with the
fact,
losing position.
I got an email this morning from a buddy of mine. He's a retired Navy SEAL commander. He
Hmm.
actually commanded the Hercules barge, which was a floating platform in the Persian Gulf back in the 1980s when the Iranians were laying mines. And he wrote, he said, the term game changing is overused and out of war fighting context. War is not a game. At least I feel sorry for the bastards who have to fight it. The term should be used as divisive, meaning something that significantly sets you apart from your enemy. So
Hmm.
uh, when you look at the HIMARS, it was supposed to be this game changer. It was going to put the Ukrainians in the driver's seat. Well,
Oh yeah.
what's happened? Uh, it's just the opposite. Uh, they are firing. I went back and counted for September. The, what the Russian Ministry of Defense reported as HIMARS that were shot down. There
Hmm.
were at least 500. The total number 623, but some of those may have included another multiple launch rocket system
Hmm.
uh, of Russian or Ukrainian origin. But anyway, that they're shooting down close, let's say 500. Each
Hmm.
one of those missiles, the rockets fired by that HIMARS, costs $100,000.
Oh shit.
Do the math.
Yeah.
We're talking between 50 and 60 million dollars shot with no effect.
Yeah.
And and I made the further point that if the HIMARS was actually hitting key Russian, troop concentrations, command headquarters, ammunition dumps, supply lines, the Ukrainians would be singing that stuff at the top of their lungs. I mean,
Exactly.
you'd be hearing about it around the clock.
Yep.
They're not.
Yep.
I mean, in fact, the Russian ambassador to the UN yesterday really made the broader point that what the HIMARS is doing is it's hitting civilian targets in the Donbass, and it's killing and wounding civilians. So that's, it's not a military game changer. If anything, it's just creating further anger on the part of the Russians.
Yeah, like for instance, with the evacuation of Kherson, that the Russians told the civilians to get out of the city. And as I understand it, there was a recent incident where a HIMARS rocket struck that convoy of civilians, and it was known to be civilians. And so that was a deliberate strike on civilians with a HIMARS that killed several people. I saw the video of it. It was pretty horrifying, actually. And it was video taken by independent journalists. So it was like the real deal. And the thing that was that kind of like stood out to me was two things. Number one, the fact that they would target civilians, knowing that they were evacuating civilians, and the targeting of the HIMARS is done by the Americans, not by the Zelensky regime. The Zelensky regime gives a list of targets, but not the actual coordinates, and so the American operators obviously know what they're hitting. So that's a war crime committed by
Yeah.
American operators of that gear. Number one. And number two, the other data point that emerged was that apparently it hadn't been one missile that had been fired. It had been something like over 2 dozen, and only one hit, and the others were all intercepted by Russian air defenses. And
Yeah.
so it tells me, oh my God, this wonder weapon is just garbage, or at least comparatively to what the Russians can do. It's just either the Russians have wonder weapons, or this HIMARS is just a POS, and so that seems to me the conclusion. Because I mean, there's another thing too. Larry, correct me if I'm wrong. The HIMARS are kind of like the top end gear of the Americans insofar as multiple rocket launch systems, isn't it?
Well, it was actually sort of a lighter. It was not the top of the system.
Hmm.
I understand that these fire they have they come in packages, 6 missiles,
Hmm.
or 6 rockets. They'll fire in, one after the other. Um,
Hmm.
Lockheed. Here's the other thing. I guess it was sort of surprising to me. Lockheed Martin is only able to build between 24 and 96 of these in 1 year. So, if they get blown up or broken down, a breakdown, because it's basically a truck. It's mechanical, and it can just through normal wear and tear stop working. Uh, you can't just immediately go out and pick up a new one. These are the again. This shows what we've gone to is a luxury defense industry. Um, in World War II, it was basically producing Volkswagens. It was producing a lot of Jeeps, things that could be built quickly and get out
Yeah.
the door in a day or two, maybe a week tops. I mean, for heaven's sakes, in the United States, they were building complete ships,
Yeah.
aircraft carriers in a month or two.
Yeah.
Unheard of.
Yeah.
Now it takes 2 to 3 years, and the same thing with these HIMARS, which are that when you think about it, just buying that truck, the truck with the launcher system is 20. I've seen two different figures. I mean, 22 million. That was what one of the NATO partners spent on each one. They bought 56 of them. They paid $1.25 billion. So just do the math.
Jesus.
Out of
Jesus.
and they got 56 of these launchers. Now, and that included they got some of the guided missile rockets to come along. Well,
Hmm.
that's when you're paying between 22 and $55 million a pop, and yet you're going to put that on a combat environment where it very easily could be destroyed, and then you can't turn around and rebuild one within the next week or two. Instead, it's going to take you 3 or 4 months. It
At
just
best.
it doesn't make sense. It just
Yeah.
doesn't make sense from a strategic standpoint.
Yeah. I mean, like the yeah, you're exactly right. It's a luxury defense force. They decided to build Rolls Royces instead of
Yeah,
VW Bugs. Yeah, I remember. Remember those Time Life books of World War II that you'd get like every other month. These
right.
beautiful, beautiful books, right? I mean, they really were lovely with all these wonderful photographs and so forth. And I remember one that struck me of the Liberty ships being built. Those Liberty transport ships.
Correct.
And they had an endless a column of them being built, one next to the other. And everybody, I mean, they look like ants working on them. Of course, it was a still photograph, but you get the idea. It was like extraordinary how they were just mass producing these barges. Um, and yeah, they were saying that they could turn it around in like 10 days or something like that, from laying down the keel to like being launched and ready to go. 10 days. That's what I recall. I could be wrong. It's not relevant. What's important is that kind of mass manufacture of weaponry, that's what the Russians did. That's basically what the Russians did, of just good enough, basic, does the job, ship it out. And so yeah, as I understand it, their production capacity for their various missiles is outpacing their use of the missiles. And so basically they have a situation where they can continue this kind of these attacks indefinitely, not for the recent offensive with missiles, but I'm talking about the entire length of the war so far.
Yeah.
But they're not going to be lacking for ammunition or artillery or whatever the hell. And so yeah, but to go back to the I posted 2 videos yesterday on my Gonzalo Lira Again channel. Guys, if you haven't subscribed to that channel that I'm doing just for my solo videos, just go to the homepage of this channel, and it's right there on top. You'll see it right away. And I posted these 2 videos because I got really freaked out when Shoigu called those 4 ministers of defense. He called the Turkish minister of defense, the French, the British, and the American, Lloyd Austin, right?
Right.
And Ben Wallace, who's the Minister of Defense of the United Kingdom, he flew to Washington for a face-to-face meeting with Lloyd Austin, which is highly unusual. And I was, and this all took place over the weekend, and I was thinking to myself, this is thanks, Zariel. this is really scary. If they're like freaking out about this, and I'd never heard of Shoigu hitting up, a bunch of ministers of defense, one after the other. The call was on his initiative. And so I thought to myself, and they started talking about a dirty bomb, the Russians. And so my thinking is they've got the intel cold. I mean, Larry, first of all, would you agree that they must have just absolute proof that the Zelensky regime is building one? Would you agree with that?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely.
I mean, they would. My thinking was, and I want you to correct me if I'm wrong. My thinking was that Shoigu would never call them up unless he was absolutely 100%. I mean, more than 100%. You know what I mean?
Right.
Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And so my thinking also is I added up the other data point, which was that the 101st Airborne Division, which are basically shock troops, was stationed in Romania. And Romania, of course, is, right there in front of Odessa. And so my thinking was that, and the further data point was that the Zelensky regime is evacuating Nikolaev, the only city it's evacuating. Nikolaev, as you would know, chat, if you look at a map, I'm not being mean. That came out wrong. I didn't mean to make it sound like that. I meant, chat, look at a map and you will see that between Kherson and Odessa on the Black Sea coast, there's Nikolaev right smack dab in the middle of it. And they were evacuating that city, but not the other cities that are right in front of the front, like Zaporozhye, like Dnipropetrovsk, like Kirovorog, And so my thinking was they're going to set off a dirty bomb in Nikolaev in an attempt to stop any Russian advance along the coastal roads to Odessa. And at the same time, by creating this obstacle, and this terrorist act, which they would blame on the Russians, it would give the opportunity for the 101st Airborne to drop into Odessa and reinforce the forces there, and eventually open this up to a direct U.S.-Russia war. That was my thesis. Do you agree with it? Where do you think are the weak points of this argument? Where do you think I'm wrong, and where do you think I'm right? I'm very curious about your opinion on this.
Yeah, well, let's first recognize that deployment of the 101st didn't take. It occurred in June. They arrived in Romania in June, and they replaced the 82nd Airborne. So this was not beefing up U.S. presence in Europe, even though that's how the CBS News report presented it.
Okay, that I didn't know.
Yeah,
okay.
So that's the first thing that if once you put that piece of information together.
Then my argument starts to collapse. I see your point.
Then the second element is that these are what used to be the 101st Airborne in terms of paratroopers who would jump out of airplanes. They've gotten away from that. They call them Brigade Combat Teams, BCTs, and these are to be deployed rapidly via helicopter and vehicles. Well, they're a light infantry. They are not a heavy infantry. And the role of light infantry in any kind of conventional war is basically to be a speed bump to slow up the advancing force, because they do not have the type of crew-served weapons that will allow them to stand, fight, and put in place a defense, notwithstanding the lore of the 101st and Bastogne, where they, held off German panzers for a couple of weeks. But this current unit is not, they're there as sort of, to show the force, to provide a visible presence, but they're not really actually capable of doing much. I mean, I think they have 1 or 2 HIMARS assigned to the unit. They may have, 3 or 4 M777 howitzers. But you've got to then look at the ammunition required to sustain those in a combat environment. I mean, Russia is literally shooting thousands of shells. Well, those shells have to come from somewhere. I don't know if you've ever picked up ammunition case with just simple 9mm ammunition in it. It's heavy. So you get into the situation that you might be able to fire a lot of rounds in in a 6-hour period, and then what do you do? So I don't see the United States uh, pushing, someone like the 101st in, because there's simply no logistics tail to support them, and
Okay.
that's the critical thing. The other thing to keep an eye on is, again, use the benchmark of what happened in 2003, the preparation to invade Iraq, or go back to 1990, the first invasion into Kuwait and southern Iraq. It took the United States at a minimum 3 to 4 months to gather up troops and start moving them in that direction, to position them, and then along with actually having the troops in place, having the logistics, the food, the water, the
Hmm.
ammunition, the medical, everything that you would need in order to support a force like that. So if we start seeing that, then I'd be concerned. But here's the problem. Germany doesn't have an army that size at all.
Hmm.
They nor does the UK. I mean, these guys are really like kids locked in their basement playing, Dungeons and Dragons and such, and they've got imaginary armies.
Hmm. So okay, because at the start of this conversation, I was asking you to talk me off the ledge, because to tell you the truth, I mean the events freaked me out.
Yeah,
But you're basically saying, calm down, Lyra. It's not that bad.
right.
It's a lot more show than actual muscle, if you will. So
Correct.
so that's what you're saying. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Because
It is the West talks a good game, but has a very limited capability. And I think Shoigu's calls uh, were not out of fear. He was putting them on notice. He's like, "Hey guys, I know what you're doing, and you can deny it, and you can pretend that you don't know what I'm talking about, but we know what's going on, and we're going to take appropriate action if
hmm.
if you do it."
Hmm.
Um, and I think I was struck to hear. I think it was Alexander Mercouris who had reported that the reason Ben Wallace went to Washington to meet with Milley and Austin
Hmm.
was that the communication system had been no longer secure.
Yeah, somebody in chat was mentioning that. I had heard that as well, from Alexander, as a matter of fact. What do you
Yeah.
think of that?
Well, these communication systems, they're made by men and women. They can be, if somebody can make it, somebody can, come up with a counter to penetrate it. I mean, that's just this. There are no static technological systems. It's a very dynamic environment. So somehow or other, it looks like the Russians penetrated it and got, which and may in fact the penetration may have involved communications with the Ukrainians about the plot to carry out the dirty bomb. And
Yeah, because that was
and
the
that
other thing in my thesis, was that this dirty bomb did not come. The idea of it, I mean, they'd been, talking about it randomly for a while, but the idea of actually implementing it, the go ahead, must have come from the West, probably from the Brits, because the Brits come up with all kinds of crazy ass notions like this.
Yeah, the Brits have really been a malevolent force in world politics, and it just go back to what happened in Syria, what happened in Libya.
Hmm. Yep.
So, in fact, this goes back a little bit to the whole Benghazi experience, but as I was part of doing some investigating back then, and we came across, just to sheer luck, a buddy of mine. He used to run. He was the admin chief at the CIA for all the non-official cover officers. So
Hmm.
anybody who would be out working for the CIA but not having any acknowledged relationship for the CIA would, this guy would manage that. And he was now working as a financial advisor out in California after he retired, of all things. And his wife came to him one day and said, "Hey, I got this friend, and her husband, he's involved with something top secret, and he's got some tax issues. Could you meet with him?" And so my buddy said, "Okay, yeah, bring him in." So this guy shows up. He had been part of the 75th Ranger Regiment. Now, 75th Ranger regiments are considered one of the top tiers in the special operations community. They're usually sort of the advanced force. If Delta Force is going to deploy to and go through an airfield, they send the 75th Rangers out to seize the airfield.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, this guy comes in and he starts talking to my friend and says, "Yeah, I'm a non." He tells him, "I'm a non-official cover officer for the CIA." So here he's telling this to the guy who was the admin chief for the non-official cover officers. And so my buddy goes, "Really? Tell me about it." Well, it turned out this guy had been recruited by Brits, and he had been
Ah.
taken to a British training facility, which was where this Special Air Service (SAS) trains.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And he was convinced he was a non-official cover officer for the Americans. In fact, the Brits were using him. And what did they use him for? They sent him to Libya. His job was to go out and find surface-to-air missiles, buy them up, and then they were being turned over to his CIA contact.
Jesus.
No, true
Jesus.
story, dude. True story.
Oh man, no, but like the Brits, yeah, they seem to be very malevolent. It's a lot of people are saying that the Brits came up with the idea to shellac Nord Stream pipelines. And by the way, did you hear that there were some seismic activity that was discovered a couple of days ago, on the 20th and the 21st? The Finns and also now the Russians confirmed that there was like seismic activity around the Nord Stream pipelines. Maybe they blew it up again, blew it up some more. You've been hearing about that?
No, I didn't hear that,
Mm.
but it wouldn't surprise me. They're just, well, the gig is up when both the Germans and the Swedes say they know who did it, but they can't talk about it. It's a national security matter. And
Yeah, obviously, number one, it's not the Russians. I
yeah,
mean, that's the first thing. It's not the
if,
Russians, and my guess is the Americans, and that would seem to indicate to me that the German leadership is not the duly representative authority of the people of Germany, but rather they are satraps of the Americans. I mean, that's how I look at it. Would you agree?
well, I think we need to recognize that it may not be it shouldn't be viewed as an either or. It's either the British or the Americans. It should be viewed as and because
Mm-hmm. Oh
the
yeah, I
the
believe that the Poles were probably mixed up in this, and certainly the Danes and the Swedes. I mean, it's right there in front of them. They would have gotten a good idea what the hell is going on if they didn't actively participate and help out.
Yeah, the active cooperation where the Brits and the Americans have sort of used each other for their own particular purposes. An example was the spying that was done on Donald Trump as he emerged as the most likely candidate for the Republican Party. The CIA and the National Security Agency are prohibited from spying on Americans. They're not supposed to do it, and they can create some real legal issues. So how do you get around that? Well, it's not illegal for the Brits to spy on Americans because we're foreigners within British law. And what nobody notices is that the General Communication Headquarters at GCHQ over in Britain sits side by side with National Security Agency analysts. So it's real easy for the Brits to collect and then pass that information to the Americans. I mean, they're literally
Yeah,
sitting in the same room.
yeah,
So and that the communications back and forth can go through an intermediary. Like in that case, it was Gina Haspel, who was the chief of station in London for the CIA. So jump ahead to now. Again, the coordination back and forth between the United States, the United Kingdom, and other countries like Poland. Um, I'm pretty sure Germany was not brought into the picture. Uh, they got surprised because it was they were going to force Germany to go cold turkey by disrupting the Nord Stream pipelines.
Jesus Christ. I mean, by the way, can I ask you, as a former CIA officer, and you see the abuses of the CIA today, do you think that there's any way to reform these bureaucracies? These
No, no.
you don't.
It has to be just. It has to be destroyed, burnt to the ground, and rebuilt. Well, I'm a firm believer that there needs to, it's important for every country to have their own intelligence agencies. That as long as the intelligence agencies are involved with the work of collecting, finding people who will give you information you're not supposed to have, and then analyzing that information. Where the CIA has gone off the rails is in the area of covert action and paramilitary activities, because it is inherently corrupting to the analytical system. And
Mhm.
I saw this firsthand with working the Contra Wars back in the 80s.
Yeah.
That once the Directorate of Operations is committed to carrying out activities like arming the Mujahideen or arming the Contras, then that becomes a policy priority. And anything that an analyst would write or say that would be undermining that program becomes an issue. And so there ends up being a lot of pushback. And what's happened over the last 10 years is there used to actually be a wall literally down the middle of the CIA building, all, from second floor on up to the top floor, a wall that separated the analysts from the operators. And
Mhm.
then somewhere in the 70s, they opened, there was a door. So they opened the door so that it was now no longer blocked off. And then eventually they got rid of it. Now they've got analysts and operators sitting in the same room working in what's called mission center. Well, it is those mission centers have the primary activity for counter narcotics or counter proliferation or whatever the issue, that the operation side of the house, the analysts go along with it. And that's what's happening even right now with this Ukraine analysis. All of the CIA support to help Ukraine beat the Russians is now forcing any analysis to take a back seat. You imagine you're a CIA analyst and want to pop up and say, let me explain to you why Russia's doing what it's doing. They don't want to hear that. They
Mm.
don't want to hear that Russia may actually have good reason to for carrying out this military operation, that it may have been provoked, as it was, by NATO
Yeah.
action by the United States. You can't get away, an analyst can't get away with saying that. So that's a long answer to say the whole thing has to be torn down. If you're going to do covert military operations like that, give that task to the military. Have them do that. Do not have a civilian intelligence organization do it.
You know what? The thing, Larry, that confuses me, quite frankly, is that the United States, in and of itself, has so many problems of its own. And rather than going around the world messing with other people's stuff, why don't they dedicate? Why doesn't America, as a country, just dedicate itself to improving its own situation? Of going more isolationist, just pulling back. It seems that the ambition of the people in Washington is limitless insofar as the rest of the world is concerned, of putting everybody under the thumb of their control. And if they don't control you, they just destroy you. I mean, it's psychopathic if you think about it, because it's collectively psychopathic. There is no longer any notion that we have to have a strong nation before we deal with other nations. No, no, no. It's we're going to let ourselves be hollowed out, our economy just hollowed out, post-industrial nonsense, and we're going to keep on messing our way with other people who aren't really doing anything to us ultimately. I mean, really, on a strategic level, would it have mattered to NATO if Ukraine had turned wholeheartedly towards Russia and it had been like a Russia Ukraine bloc? It really wouldn't have affected the West, or do you disagree?
No, no, that's well, I've always called it the United States is la suegra borracha, the
Mm.
drunken mother-in-law, and the mother-in-law that's always telling the son-in-law, "Hey, you stop drinking, hey, you stop doing this," and she ends up doing everything that she's telling the other person not to do. the 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 control of the United States, um, something has really changed fundamentally over the last 25 years. It's true that back in the 50s and then into the 60s, it was a much, let's call it a much simpler uh, catering to whether it's United Brands, the fruit company down in Central America, or the oil companies with respect to Iran. Um,
Hmm.
Now it's the financial relationships, interrelationships, far more complex, and it looks like the U.S. continues to act like it's in control, and its control has been slipping, and now it's sort of the ultimate act of suicide by the kinds of economic sanctions imposed on Russia have finally broken the dam where Russia, China, India, Brazil, the other the countries outside of the NATO club are now creating an alternative financial system. And once you have that, the ability of the United States to be the one who writes all the checks and controls the money flow, that's history. And that then limits the ability of the United States to interfere. This, you know, who was it? I think it was Chalmers Johnson made the astute observation that you have a choice. You can be a democracy, or you can be an an imperialist power, where you go out and try to enforce rules on others. But he says you can't be both. If you're a democracy, you're basically going to stay close to home and not pose a threat to others. And the United States is dressed up in the costume of democracy, but we've conducted ourselves much like the Roman Empire, and with really a disregard for the what happens to these other countries.
Yeah, hang on. I'm answering the chat, but you're right. That's a very good point. Of that, you can't be a democracy and an empire. It's one or the other.
Right.
The problem is that it doesn't seem that we have much of a democracy anymore. And by the way, I'm extremely curious to see the results of these midterm elections, because I personally think that they're going to be crooked, incredibly crooked. And so, what do you think of that? I mean, do you think that it's going to be on the up and up, or do you think that they're going to ballot harvest and fraudulent mail-in votes and so forth, and it's going to be like just unbelievable, but there isn't going to be any mechanism to stop this insanity? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah. No, I think. Look, let's recognize the political system here in the United States has always been corrupt, always open to abuse and theft. Just ask John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah, or Richard Daley. He's the man
yeah,
to talk to
yeah.
about that. Yeah.
So that's gone on for a while. I think actually what's happened as a result of the 2020 fraud that took place is that several states have instituted now new controls, new systems to make it more difficult to cheat. So I think just the opposite's going to happen. That I think the red wave is going to come. Now, does that mean that there will be a fundamental change in U.S. policy? Um, you still got the Mitch McConnells and the Lindsey Grahams who are so keen on going to war in Ukraine. You've got Kevin McCarthy, who's supposedly going to be the new Speaker of the House, saying that we're going to have to take a good close look at how much money we're sending to Ukraine. When you step back, because this goes to a point you were making earlier, the United States has spent over $1 trillion over the last 20 years in fruitless, feckless wars in
Mm.
Iraq, in Afghanistan, and now Ukraine. I mean, we're literally we're upwards of $30 billion in 10 months in Ukraine, and Congress is talking about putting in another 50 billion in the pot. Now that's money that doesn't go to rebuild the crumbling infrastructure, which is all across America. Uh, the whether we're talking airports or railroads or bridges, even the communication system we have the internet's not as strong or robust as it should be. So the United States is sort of it's throwing all of this money into wasteful military adventures, and it's really only benefiting a few of the defense industry. The point I made earlier about the HIMARS. It may not be a game changer for Ukraine militarily, but by God, it is a game changer for those Lockheed Martin stockholders.
Oh yeah.
They're
Yes.
they're,
And
they got some guaranteed
as
contracts,
a former shareholder, I can attest to that. Yes.
and they get to make more money because now the HIMARS is in such demand, the price goes up. It's just it really is a racket.
Yeah, war is a racket, as Smedley Butler said famously.
Right.
Yeah. The other thing, though, that seems to be a real game changer are these flying Doritos, the flying lawnmowers that
Mhm.
seem to have been basically Iranian designed but modified by the Russians with their own GPS equivalent.
No,
Those
you're wrong.
seems to have
You
been real game changers.
Well, you're wrong about who designed it.
Oh, who
The,
designed it?
the United States. Remember back in 2000, 2000, I think it was 2011, the first one, and then the second one. The Iranians brought down a CIA drone.
Hmm.
It was one of the most sophisticated drones. I think it's called a 179. And
Hmm.
so they got that and they reverse engineered the hell out of it. So when you put it side by side with
Hmm.
the new with the Iranian geraniums, or the
Hmm.
shaheeds, I guess they're called
Hmm.
shaheeds, you're going, huh? They look related. So that's why I say the irony of it is I don't know if Iran had assistance from Russia with the electronic warfare means, but what they did have, it was this drone. The CIA was using this drone out on the border of Iran, flying it from Iraq, and the Iranians brought it down intact, then reverse engineered it, and they use some technology that they gleaned from that in making their own Shaheed. Now it has
Hmm.
a different engine type. The CIA drone had a sort of a jet engine, and the Iranians have your more conventional propeller-driven model. But the point was the technology inherent in that drone for both guidance was, I think, originated in the United States, and hey, the Iranians happily stole it.
Yeah, because as I understand it, also one of the big problems that air defense systems are having with these drones is that the heat signature, because it is a propeller engine and a
Right.
very slow moving one at that, because of that, it has a very very low heat signature. It looks at best like a flock of birds, and so they're not able to pin it down. And I found it just so hilarious that a drone knocked down one of the MiG-29s that the Zelensky regime had. I mean, well, thankfully the pilot seems to have survived, but it must be incredibly embarrassing to be the first man in history whose supersonic, super sophisticated, you know, multiple $1 million jet was taken down by a, $10,000 flying Dorito. I mean, that
Yeah.
is just it's screamingly funny.
I
Mhm.
mean, it's the apt metaphor to actually describe what has become modern warfare, where really NATO has gone on, let's call it the Lamborghini strategy. Yeah,
Yeah.
they want to have everything's like the Lamborghini. And, Lamborghini is a beautiful car, and it can go fast as long as you don't have any other cars around you. But it's not exactly what you'd want to use as a commuter vehicle in an urban environment, or over any kind of rough road.
Yeah.
It needs a very particular kind of road to be able to get
You
its
need a
full
track,
performance.
basically.
Well,
You
yeah.
know.
So this is what the United States has opted for in terms of its entire panoply of weapons. Uh,
Mm.
we're going for all the Lamborghini stuff, and it's because it's driven by politics. The the defense industry, the military industrial complex, hires the lobbyists. The lobbyists go up and give money to the members of Congress who are desperate for money. And then in the process, they may actually get a defense plant put into their district, which provides a few jobs. Therefore, they can justify spending it. And the more you spend on these things, the better it is for everybody around, except the money is not being spent according to what is actually needed to secure, to have an effective weapon that can operate. So then you turn to these drones. I mean, as you said, some of them may be far less than $10,000, and yet they're going up against. They can destroy multi-million-dollar weapons. Or, if you're going to shoot, let's say you're going to try to shoot it down with a HIMAR, and not that the HIMAR rocket would be designed, but you're throwing $100,000 rocket at a $10,000 drone. Does that make economic sense?
Yeah, but also the point is that, I actually saw a video of a swarm of these drones flying over Odessa. It was incredible. Okay, I mean, it looked like an alien invasion. Okay, but it had that distinctive droning sound, that helicopter propeller driven noise to it, and it was just weird because they were so slow. That was the thing that struck me. You could see the parallax with the clouds. These things were going so slow. You almost thought that they were going to fall out of the sky. They were going so slowly. And what I found incredible is that I tried to count up how many were there, and I couldn't. There were just so many of them. And I'm thinking to myself, yeah, sure, one HIMARS rocket, $100,000. And that's 10 of these drones. And yeah, the payload is less and all the rest of it. But, 2, 3 of these are going to get through, even if you have the best air defense systems, and people shooting AK-47s up at the sky to knock them down. You're still going to have quite a few who are going to get through. As we've seen, it's just bizarre. It's just the Lamborghini approach to war is a disaster.
Right. Yeah, it is. It's important to note, when drones started entering the picture as being involved with warfare?
Late 80s, 90s, I believe.
No, really about 2001, right after
really?
9/11. Yeah, it was back then. It was considered sort of CIA classified technology, and so I think the CIA maybe first started using it like 98, 99, but it was not widespread and hadn't got out to the public. And I know that because the CIA was using it to monitor Taliban activities right after 9/11. But it is now it's expanded that, hell, 8-year-old kids are building drones and flying them, doing things that used to be only sort of the purview of CIA technical officers.
Well, I remember when I was a kid, like in 80, 81 maybe, playing with remote controlled airplanes, right? Just bought them at the Toys R Us kind of thing, right? And over the years, I thought to myself, why didn't they do this before? Because, I mean, it's such an obvious technology. It's so simple, and it's just a small little thing. Nobody notices it. And so, very different. And insofar as, you're talking about Lamborghini weapons. Yeah. Remember when the M777s got deployed and the undersecretary, or assistant minister of defense of Ukraine complained about them because he said that, they only last like 7-8 hours of firing, and then they have to be taken back to do maintenance, and they have to be shipped back to Poland. I mean, they shut him up soon after. They, no more. They actually put out a missive saying nobody critique American weapons. But that's the problem with Lamborghini weapons. Yeah, they're great while they work. I mean, anybody who's ever owned a fancy car like that, like a Lamborghini or Ferrari, God bless you if you own one, because it's constant maintenance, incredibly expensive, and you only get to drive it, maybe 60-70% of the time. The rest of the time, it's got some issue. And that kind of military, we're seeing it now for real. You can't have that. And so I'm one. Go ahead.
You're describing the 35.
The what? Oh, the F-35. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
a piece of shit. That's just
I mean,
garbage.
that's exactly what you're describing.
Yeah, yeah, and I cannot believe that the American Defense or the Defense Department, the Pentagon, whomever, got bamboozled into that. Uh, um, it's a white elephant. It seems to me. It's trying to do everything, and so it does nothing well. I think it's insane that they went ahead with that program, and in the end, the cost of it is supposed to be $1 trillion
Yeah.
by the end of it all, and you're saying how? I mean, 1 trillion. That's $1 million. That's what it is. And for what? For planes that the software doesn't work. It doesn't do what it's supposed to. I mean, it's just a big disaster.
Well, the point that Andrei Martyanov is always smartly made is that the real difference between the defense procurement in the West and defense procurement in Russia is that what is done in Russia is done in accordance with an actual strategic defensive plan. So
Mm,
they select weapon systems that can do a particular job to defend Mother Russia.
yeah.
Whereas what happens, the defense procurement process in the West is really more a function of politics
Yeah.
and and the right connections. Doesn't necessarily mean that it's necessarily the best technology. It's just you got the people that have the most clout to get money appropriated on Capitol Hill and then spent. It is, you're right about we used to you could fly model airplanes, but there was a limit to how far you could fly them because of the communications. That was
Hmm.
always the drawback.
Hmm.
You could not do remotely piloted vehicles until we had certain satellite systems and global internet systems, if you will, in place. And
Hmm.
that was the game changer, so that the United States then started making drones like the Predator, which could be put up, could fly for 24 hours, wouldn't have to land and be refueled or have midair refueling. It could stay up overhead and provide constant images of what was going on. That was really sort of a game changer. And within that is pointing to sort of the future, because we've the popular. Have you seen the Top Gun movie, the latest version?
No, I haven't seen it, but I know enough about it. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
I haven't. I refuse to watch it. But
No, because to tell you the truth, it seems to me like just rah military porn, military
well,
propaganda.
but it's yeah, it's that. But it's also it's so ridiculous that the entire movie's premised around getting a bunch of human beings in cockpits to fly in and carry out some suicide mission. When Why don't you just use a drone?
Yeah, yeah, exactly right.
You
And
know,
the drone, you could just program it in its flight path, and it'll do exactly what you want. Unlike a pilot, a human pilot who will make mistakes.
so
And
we're
so, yeah, it seemed foolish, but it's an entertainment. And, I
well
mean,
that
it did its job insofar as entertainment is concerned. I mean, I didn't watch it, like I said, but from the numbers of box office and what people have been saying about it, it did its job of being an entertaining distraction, but it's
yeah.
not real. And by the way, what was interesting about it is that they never actually named the enemy. It's kind of like supposed to be Russia, but they don't say it's Russia. And it was very amusing. But I wanted to turn a little bit from like talking military porn and crapping all over American overpriced Lamborghini weaponry. I wanted to talk to you about something else, about the situation in China.
Mhm.
Did you see that clip of
Yeah,
the Party Congress where they removed Hu Jintao? I think his name is.
yeah,
I can't recall, and please forgive me.
yeah. No,
Um,
that's right.
yeah, Brian Berletic at New Atlas, you know him, right?
Right. Yes.
And he's a smart man, but he said no, there was just an elderly gentleman that they were removing because he was having an episode or something like that. I personally think that no, that yeah, probably he is, with problems, health problems, dementia, and what happens of a very elderly gentleman such as himself. But I think that was a deliberate move, um, to show who's really got his hand on the frying pan handle. I mean, I think that it was a deliberate power play. Had it not been, they would have cut the feed. and not allow that part to be recorded. And in fact, if he had been so, pulled down because of health issues, incapacitated by health issues, they would have not had him there at all. They would have somehow said some very credible excuse. The fact that he was removed, it seems to me, in public, on camera, it seems that it was a power move by Xi Jinping. Because Brian Atlas does not think so, but I mean, and I respect Brian, of course, and I consider him a friend in this community, quote unquote. But I disagree with him on that. I think it was a deliberate power move. What do you think?
Well, it sort of reminded me of watching Joe Biden perform. I remember they brought that because you look at him and he's sort of got a blank stare on his face. You
Yeah,
can tell. Um, so he was, and when uh, when the Chinese leader had to turn to him to remind him he needed to sit down
yeah, yeah.
because he was going to keep standing there until told, "Hey, you can sit down now." Um, I think there's, I think there's a way we can, it could, both you and Brian can be correct. I think that he was deliberate. They knew what his limitations were. They knew that this was a man of frail health and probably declining mental capability. And so that they knew that they could bring him out, and you have just a visible contrast between the current leader and the former leader. So, and the former leader's association with the United States was being perceived as pro-American. I think at helping him out. Now, they didn't drag him out. It'd be one thing, and he wasn't like grabbing hold of the chair and clutching at it and just kicking and screaming. It's just like they had to say, hey, I don't know if he was wearing an adult lens and had an accident or what, but they're leaning over and then finally persuade him that yeah, he needs to walk out. But as he walks out, he taps somebody on the arm like, "Hey, buddy," it, I didn't sense any alarm on his part. He was just, mentally incapacitated like Joe Biden. And by the way, did you hear what Biden said today about Rishi Sunak?
No, what?
He called him Rashid Sunak. I mean, he got
Oh God,
completely butchered the name. He's Rashid now.
Rashid. Yeah,
Oh, but anyway,
yeah.
I think the propaganda. I keep watching with interest the Western propaganda about Xi Jinping and what's going on in China. You remember, was it about 2 weeks ago? I mean, there was a coup underway in China. Xi Jinping was locked up, or the military take. It turned out just complete crap. It was not true.
Well, it
So
doesn't sell papers now, does it?
yeah, the West, and this highlights a problem, particularly in the United States. Uh, Most people in the United States do not speak a foreign language unless they are children of first generation immigrants.
Mhm.
So you have an enormous amount of ignorance about the world because, as you know, the best way to learn about a place is to at least be able to speak some of the language. And so the failure of the United States to deal with languages like Russian and Chinese, because they're hard languages, adds to the ignorance level and makes it far easier for the average American to be completely bamboozled with just propaganda nonsense.
Yeah, Mark Twain famously said that Americans go to foreign wars so they can learn geography.
But I thought that, well, Ambrose Bierce, I think, was credited with that. He was known
Oh,
as, he was the misanthrope, but it's not even clear that Ambrose Bierce said it. But hey, it's always it's a great line.
yeah, but it's a great line because it's true. I
Yeah,
mean,
absolutely.
Americans, before this conflict, February 23rd, nobody I mean, 99% of the population in the United States had no idea where Ukraine was. They couldn't have pointed it out on a map.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and the now the sudden wave of sympathy and concern for the civilian casualties in the Ukraine, in the let's call it the Ukrainian-controlled parts of Ukraine. And while being ignored for years, really just the mass slaughter of the civilians in the Donbass, aided and abetted by the West, with
Yeah.
not a single voice, no
Oh, no, no,
significant voice.
they completely deny it. I mean, the ongoing shelling of Donetsk, the city of Donetsk, where they are deliberately targeting civilian areas and areas where there are concentrations of civilians, far from any kind of military equipment or troops.
Mhm.
That just goes to show you, the level of brutality of the Kiev regime. I mean, see, in this conflict from the get-go, I thought to myself, look, I am not Ukrainian. I am here as a guest of the Ukrainian government. And so in any country that I've lived, and I've lived in a number of them, I have never gotten involved in anything political on the local level in that nation. I've lived in the Netherlands, in Germany, in France, and the UK. Sure, I pay attention to the politics more or less, but never publicly given any opinion, and not even privately, quite frankly, because I don't think it's my place as a guest. And so when this conflict started, I was like, okay, I understand the Russians, I understand the Ukrainians, but I'm going to try to remain aloof from this entire conflict. But as you just casually start to learn information about what's really going on, you start realizing, there is a clear good guy here. There is a very clear bad guy, and the West has it topsy-turvy. I mean, because the Russians, it seems to me, were incredibly patient. True, they were patient because of necessity, because they needed to prepare themselves for a possible confrontation with NATO, certainly on an economic and political level. But insofar as just trying to negotiate, come to some sort of political settlement that would be nonviolent, that would appease everyone, they went the distance.
Yeah,
And finally, enough was enough. And then, as the war has unfolded, and you see the brutality of the Kiev regime, because it really is brutality towards civilians. War is war, and yeah, soldiers on both sides are going to get killed in horrible ways, and that's an unfortunate byproduct of war. It can't be helped. But torturing and murdering POWs, and bragging about it and posting it on Telegram channels and whatnot, or else shelling civilians, knowing that they're civilians, like in Donetsk city, like in the Kherson evacuation, and in countless other places. Patrick Lancaster has physically shown on YouTube, and I remember it very clearly. He came across a Zelensky regime position that had been abandoned. And he discovered this woman who had been brutally raped and murdered, and her body smeared with a swastika. And I thought that's brutality. That's just sickening. And so
yeah.
I have to say that in this conflict, I know who the good guys are and who the bad guys are, and the West is supporting the bad guys, and they don't seem to realize it, and instead they go with this fake saccharine sentimentality and this rah jingoism for the bad guys. They are, it's like that famous meme, of that from one of the British shows that had like some overweight Nazi officer, who says to a friend, Helmut or something like that, or Gunter, are we the baddies?
Yeah.
And like, yeah, you are, and I don't quite get it, or no, I do get it, that propaganda is effective, and there's a reason that people do it, because it works,
Well, there's a documentary out. I think its title was "What Our Fathers Knew," and it features a British lawyer who's Jewish,
Hmm.
who takes the son of Hans Frank and the son of von Wachter. Hans
Hmm.
Frank was the governor, the Nazi governor of Poland, and von Wachter was the Nazi governor of Ukraine. And so, both men, in this documentary, they're in their 70s now because they were born in the 40s. late 70s. And in part of that, they wind up going back to Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this thing came out in like 2016, 2017. This is when I saw it, and I was really shocked because in Hans Frank, the son of Hans Frank, totally rejected his father, despised his father for what he did. That his crimes were unforgivable, in overseeing the death camps, the extermination camps in Poland.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas von Wachter was like, still thought the world of his dad.
Mm-hmm.
So in part of this video, they show up in Ukraine, and there are these guys marching around in Nazi SS uniforms.
Yeah.
And this was 2015. This was not 30, 40 years ago. This is current day. And they were celebrating, they were commemorating the fact that Ukrainians had been part of the Nazi army. And there was one particularly elderly gent who comes up to the son of von Wachter and goes, "Oh, I remember your father. We need some more men like him back here." So it was just a reminder that that the horrors that were visited upon the world by Nazi Germany, you still got people out there that embrace it and think, "Hey, this is a dandy idea." It's crazy. And yet that's what the United States is embracing. It is just sheer madness.
Yeah. And by the way, a quick parenthesis. Garland, if you're listening, I sent you a link to join the stream, and I just checked the email went out like at 6:12 my time, which is about 9 minutes ago. You should have gotten it by now. Larry, it turned out that Garland Nixon was listening in, and I've never interacted with Garland, so I'm really looking forward to him hopping on and
Okay.
shooting the breeze about the contemporary situation, because this stream that we're doing is like a comfy stream. It's like we're just chilling and shooting the breeze and going over a whole bunch of topics. I hope, chat, that you're enjoying it. Give me a +1 for Larry if you're enjoying him, because I certainly am. And yeah, it's always a pleasure to have him on. And Garland, hop on. Like I said, I sent you the link, so you should have gotten it already. I mean, you should have gotten it a while ago. Like I said, I sent it now. It's 10 minutes ago. So yeah, when Garland pops into the waiting room, I'll pull him right in.
Sure.
But
I was on an RT program with Garland.
Oh, really? Yeah. It's weird. It's sometimes, Garland has been on with the Duran Boys, and I've been on with them a bunch of times, right? It's sometimes, you're just somebody that, you're like two passing ships in the night, you kind of like miss each other. And I'm actually really looking forward to having Garland on. So yeah, that's going to be a lot of fun. But by the way, talking about Rashid Sunak, Rashid Sunbeam. Yeah, that's his name. Rashid. That's what Joe Biden told me. It's Rashid Sunbeam. He was, best friends and the gang with Corn Pop. Well, anyway, so what do you think of Rashid as the new prime minister? I mean, what do you think of the shit show that's going on in the UK? I mean, Liz Truss lasted all of 45 days. Damn.
And it was there had not been this quick of a turnover of a prime minister in 300 years. This is going back to 1721. Think about that.
Jesus. Yeah, because let's count. There's been Cameron, David Cameron, right? And then and initially he was actually like co-prime minister with what's his face, the that forgettable man. I forget his name actually. I mean, he's completely forgettable. You know who I'm talking about, right?
Name? Yes.
Yeah, he was like co-prime minister with what's his face. Then David Cameron. Then who came after that? Theresa May. Who was a non-entity and a disaster. And then Boris, Liz Truss. Yeah, this is the fifth prime minister. Nick Clegg. Thank you, chat. This is the fifth prime minister in how long now? David Cameron left in 2016. So in 6 years, we've had 5 prime ministers. Holy cow!
3 and 4 months. So
I beg your pardon?
3 and 4 months.
Oh yeah, that's extraordinary.
Yeah. So that is it is such a disconnect to have this kind of political chaos underway in the so-called United Kingdom, the ironically named United Kingdom, with the domestic political chaos, and they keep doubling down on support for Ukraine. And again, it's supporting a government that contains a significant element of genuine Nazis. I mean, it boggles the mind. This they seem just completely out of touch with reality.
Well, they were supporting ISIS and Al Qaeda at some point, weren't they?
Yeah, they were. It's not clear if they were directly supporting ISIS, but they certainly were supporting radical Islamists that were, wanting to, purify the world of the unbelievers. And again, this I go back, and I was actually, my partner and I were brought in to do a briefing for some military folks on financial matters, on how to do financial investigations. And this, the stuff with ISIS had been going on for 2 or 3 years. I mean, they were just running all over Syria, and in brand new, Toyota pickups. And so one of the things, we did a lot of investigations of automobile smuggling, global smuggling, both smuggling into Russia and smuggling into China. And so we had some background in this, and it turned out the U.S. military had not done even the basic, put in place the basic tools needed to actually track the financial resources that were keeping the ISIS going. I've always been a big believer that, you follow the money, you cut off the money, you can really do damage to someone. And
you cut the oxygen, and that's that. Yeah.
United States always talks a good game about, oh yeah, we're going to follow the money. They never do. They're terrible at it.
But let me ask you something. I actually wanted to turn a little bit to the United States right now. I haven't lived in the States in over 20 years. I've been to the States. The last time was 2019, but I'm not there with my finger on the pulse, if you will. What's the situation like in the States right now? I mean, like, really, what's the vibe in the air? I mean, I know that this is very subjective, but I'm very curious, and you're a perceptive guy, and so you would have a sense. What's the sense of the people in the States right now?
But it depends on where you live. So the folks in the urban areas are freaking out. I had a call a week ago from a friend. He was born in India. He is a physician in the United States. His elderly parents, are here, and they live literally almost across the street from the Congressional Country Club, which is on River Road in Washington, D.C., Maryland, and it's called Potomac. Well, they're having a huge issue now with home invasions. People are coming in, invading the homes, and the police aren't doing anything. So he was looking for some help, and I hooked him up with some security resources. But that you've got that you've seen in New York City, you've got to basically either be a mixed martial artist with some proficiency to ride the subway anymore, or you're taking your life into your hands. And you've got that going on with police resigning, so you've got less police presence, and in many of these places like Philadelphia, like New York, you got a crime back out on the street with hardly, little not spending any time in jail. So this is sweeping that fear that, from 2 years ago, it was defund the police. Now it's like, man, hire more police as fast as we can. And so I live in Florida. So in Florida, there's not a lot of madness that goes on down here because people are armed and they'll shoot your ass. So people tend to behave themselves.
Yeah,
You don't see
Florida man.
yeah, you don't see a lot of craziness that you do in some of the other states where they've outlawed firearms and people are, in some states, if somebody's breaking into your house, this shows you how crazy it's gotten. You're supposed to run out of your house and flee. You can't shoot or take action to defend yourself in your own home if someone's breaking in.
No, that's absurd.
That's up, I think, in New Jersey. Well, with all the local police down in Florida, the county sheriff, they're always saying, hey, they're breaking in, shoot them, and make sure you shoot them enough so we don't have to spend any resources on an investigation.
Yeah.
I mean, honest, just north of me in it's called Polk County, they had some guy who had shot and killed a sheriff's deputy, and when they caught this guy, he got shot 67 times. And one of the reporters said, well, why did you shoot him 67 times? And the police chief says, we ran out of ammunition.
Oh man, that's Florida for you. No,
Yeah,
but
so
but and also, by the way, that Texas is going, just Texas is another kettle of fish. But the genuine point I'm really curious about, you were saying that in the urban areas, people are very scared. Are they scared about crime, or are there other issues that they're scared about? I would think the inflation, because I follow some random channels that have, like, for instance, New York property prices, rental prices, right?
right.
And I look at those prices and I'm like, holy shit, they're paying like over $4,000 for, maybe I don't know, maybe 500 square feet. And I'm like, I can't believe you're paying that kind of money for this garbage unit. I mean, the inflation seems astronomical. And the other thing that they seem to be saying, all of them, is that all of the offices are empty. They're like 90% vacancy. They're just, there are no people are just not going to the office anymore. And so in Manhattan is becoming just a playground of the uber wealthy or nothing. And it's just a disaster. I mean, like a return to the 70s kind of thing. And so I understand that the situation in New York City, at least, is bad. But what else do you feel insofar as the vibe of the country? I mean, does anybody have any hope? Is the question I guess I'm asking.
No, there's a lot of concern because you got some weather issues too. The central part of the United States is getting savaged with the drought. I mean, they are really hurting, and their ability to plant a healthy winter wheat crop is up and down. The Mississippi River, it's just like what's happened to the Rhine and the Danube. Those rivers are way down, as I understand, in Europe, and they're seeing low water marks that haven't been seen in 400 years. The barge traffic is not moving up and down the Mississippi as freely as it once did. So it is that combination of inflation, the illegal immigration, the crime wave associated with that, and the deaths from fentanyl, the drug use. I mean, it's killing a lot of people, and it's just it's becoming more prevalent. So this breakdown in order, and there are some indications that in some states like Oregon, I believe, you're going to have the first Republican governor in decades, and that it's just a complete turnaround because people are just angry and upset. The whole combination of lack of security, physical and economic, and we've just announced today there is a 25-day supply of diesel in this country, and the demand for it's going up. So with no diesel, guess what? Trucks that are essential for hauling food into these urban areas, if they're not running, what do you do? We live part of what's happened in the United States that you never experienced when you were here are the shortages that are cropping up. This is the stuff we used to talk about in the old Soviet Union. You go in and you got bare shelves staring at you. You go to car dealerships, the dealerships when I first came down to this part of Florida in 2019, I went and purchased a Kia Telluride. It's like a sport utility vehicle.
Hmm.
The lot was full of
Right.
vehicles. They had at least 4 or 5 of these Tellurides. Today, there are like 2 cars on that lot. 2.
Jesus.
I mean, and why? Well, they don't have the chips, the chips that go into these cars that are coming out of Taiwan and China. They don't have the chips. So with no chips, no cars. And it's not just isolated here. It is across the country. I've got another, like Toyota, very popular brand in the United States. Their imports on those are way down. So you've got these supply chain problems. It's pretty dark move. I think that's why there's going to be this, I think, a fairly dramatic pushback in the election. The media is going out of its way yeah, it's like that Leslie Nielsen scene from, what was it, Police Story, where
Yeah.
he's standing there telling people to remain calm, and in the background, a nuclear bomb's going off, and buildings are on fire, and the cars are getting blown apart, and he's saying, "Remain calm, nothing to see here."
Yeah. Yeah.
That's sort of the situation they have now with Joe Biden as president, because he's now even fallen asleep on camera while being interviewed.
I know. I saw that. Holy cow. He actually fell asleep. Damn. I mean, and
Yeah,
he was and the worst part was that he was like sort of like in the middle of his response
yeah,
when
yeah.
he was like saying something and this sort of like nodded off for a few
You know, the,
seconds and then he came back. I couldn't believe it, man.
Yeah, it was like watching Bilbo Baggins at the end of Lord of the Rings, when he was this
No, it
elderly
was
Bilbo
worse. It
Baggins.
was worse, I mean, at least Bilbo said his lines. Poor Joe. I mean, like, look, I hate Joe Biden. I think that he's a he's just garbage as a man. Okay, back when he was like healthy. I remember the '91 hearings on the Clarence Thomas thing. Hell, I remember when he ran for president in '88, and they came out with all these speeches that he had plagiarized from Neil Kinnock. And it was just so. I mean, it ruined his run. And nobody trusted him back then. I remember the first time that I paid attention to Joe Biden, and then in '91 for the Clarence Thomas hearings, I would hear him, and he was so disingenuous and just a horrible individual. But at
Yeah,
this point, I mean, that individual is gone, and I look at some decrepit old man, and I feel sorry for him on a human level, and I wish he'd go to some retirement home. It's just pathetic.
yeah,
And God knows how many amphetamines and God knows what other drugs they're giving him to prop him up. It reminds me. I don't know if you're familiar with El Mio Cid Campeador, the story of the great Spanish champion who fought the Arabs.
no,
Well, El Mio Cid Campeador is the Spanish national poem, and it's about El Mio Cid, who was this El Cid.
oh, El Cid, okay, yes, yeah,
Yeah,
El Cid.
Rodrigo. I forget his name right now. Chat, help me out. I forgot his name. And I had to memorize pieces of that poem back when I was in like, what was it, 10th grade, right? But anyway, the point is that he died at some point, right? But he was so fearsome, his reputation was so ferocious that when the enemy came to attack the city of Valencia, they propped him up. They propped up his body on a corpse in full
Uh-huh,
armor, and rode out with him, right? And
right.
that was enough to scare off the Arabs, and they fled at the sight of El Mio Cid Campeador, right? It's kind of like that, but non-heroic. It's like that, but pathetic, because the El Cid story is like heroic, that even in death he had the power to frighten his enemies, right? And here
Mhm.
it's like this decrepit old man is like, Putin will not
Yeah.
get away with that.
Well, the corruption aspect of this, with respect to um, both his son, for his brother Jim, that
Yeah.
they've really, they're everything that they accused Donald Trump of, and
Yes,
us,
exactly everything that they
yeah,
accused him of.
they've enriched themselves and used Ukraine as part of it. I mean, what I continue to be sort of puzzled by you've got is Ukraine, the contradiction of Ukraine, because on the one hand, Ukraine is in of all countries in the world, Ukraine is in the top 5 in terms of natural resources, from rare earth minerals and wheat, and it should be, from the standpoint of the resources, mineral resources it had, it should be one of the wealthiest countries in the world.
Yes.
And yet it's the most corrupt. And inherent in that corruption, you've got all these former U.S. government officials that are sitting on boards of Ukrainian corporations. I mean, Kofor Black, he was the CIA chief who oversaw the capture of Carlos the Jackal, and then he was the head of the Counterterrorism Center, and then he left. When he left CIA, he was appointed as the ambassador in my old office at State, in the Office of Counterterrorism. And so he winds up on a natural gas company board. That makes as much sense as putting me on the board. I don't have any expertise in that. My experience with natural gas.
What happened was that, after the collapse in '91 of the Soviet Union, right? The whole country of Ukraine was divvied up by oligarchs. And they themselves were the ones who financed and created these paramilitary units. When you look at all these units, Azov, Right Sector, all the rest of them, you trace their lineage, and they all go back to oligarchs. They were basically the private armies of these oligarchs. And what happened was that Ukraine never had their Putin, because Putin put the muzzle on the oligarchs in Russia and prevented them from having their own private armies. And in that famous meeting at the very start of his regime, Putin met with all the oligarchs and said, "Look, so long as you don't get messed up involved in the government or intelligence or try to compete with the state, we'll be fine. Just make your money. That's fine. Just don't get into politics and don't compete with the state." And the few oligarchs who did, like what was the name of that famous oligarch who was always in the news?
Khodorkovsky.
Yeah.
Michael Khodorkovsky, is it?
I think so. I forget. The guy with the glasses, the young guy who was like very charismatic, and he was like setting himself up as some sort of alternative to Putin. He wound up in jail in a cage.
Yeah, that's Khodorkovsky. That's Khodorkovsky.
Yeah. And so the point is that Ukraine never had the Putin figure, because if you look at the oligarchs who control Russia today, number one, there are more of them. Number two, each of them has a lot less power. And number three, they're all different from the old oligarchs of '99. He put the muzzle on them, and to the benefit of Russia. But that never happened in Ukraine. And so each city in Ukraine is sort of like the fiefdom, of different oligarchs. And it's sort of like they divided up the country. And the thing is, that kind of corruption, of oligarchic corruption, it's not that you're seeing it in Ukraine. It's that you're seeing it in the States. And what's interesting is that what the Americans want to do, and I think that this is how the Russians view the situation, is that the Americans, and they say so, they want to break up Russia into smaller countries and basically let the oligarchs run it. And the Russians understand this. That they understand exactly what the Americans want. They want Russia to be broken up and in the hands of a bunch of oligarchs who will just extract riches without actually building anything. And that's what happened in Ukraine. And that's why Ukraine, which is per square kilometer probably as rich, if not richer, than Russia per average square kilometer, if you think of it in those terms. And certainly it has an incredibly educated and hardworking population. But it's the second poorest, before the war, it was the second poorest country in Europe, for crying out loud.
Yeah, just it makes no sense.
No. And what deeply disturbs me about the situation in the United States is that, when I was growing up, there were rich people, sure, but now there's this weird glamorization of the rich. And the rich, you have Elon Musk, you have Warren Buffett, and they're like heroes. And I think that is deeply wrong. I can't offhand recall, as I'm talking to you, who was the richest man in America in '75, say. I mean, we're roughly the same age, so you would recall.
Maybe Howard Hughes.
Yeah, Howard Hughes, yeah. But there wasn't this this weird kind of oligarchic structure to the society.
Yeah.
And what deeply disturbs me is that all of the news media, if you look at, there are all these channels, all these news outlets, but when you start, following the money, you realize it's only like 5 different companies, and they all march to the same tune. Mhm. And you see that with all the food processing, you see that in all the medications and whatnot. Everything is just concentrated in the hands of a very few people. And these people ultimately are corrupt. They are, profit driven. And since they realize that their position is so secure, they have no trouble in exploiting the people in the United States and just milking them like cows and then sending them to the slaughter when they're done. And I think that this is a deeply disturbing trend that I blame, frankly, Alan Greenspan, who encouraged monopolistic practices because he said it was economically more efficient, which might have been true, but at the cost of concentrating power in such few hands, which I think has been a disaster for the United States. And I think that that's precisely what the Russian leadership class, wants to avoid at all costs. And we see the results of when it is applied full throttle in Ukraine. I mean,
Well,
it's simple as
we're
that.
becoming more class rigid, sort of. I lived in Argentina in 1984.
Right.
Part of the end of 83, all of 84, part of 85. And frankly, what I'm seeing now in the United States is reminding me of what Argentina was like back then,
Yeah.
where you've got an oligarch class, then you have a struggling middle class, and the inflation is just devastating to that struggling middle class. It ends up actually pushing them down further into poverty, and
Mm.
that's the trend that's underway in this country. I mean, we've got some things, if you try to take a family to like Disney World, I'd never do that, but you're gonna waterboard me first to do that. But if to go to Disneyland now, I mean, it's several $1,000s
Yep.
to go on a family vacation. I remember growing up when I had 3 brothers and sisters, so a family of 4, my mom and dad, they'd pile us in a car and we'd go for vacation. We'd go drive from Missouri back to Virginia to visit relatives. Well,
Hmm.
that was, you know, we could
That's gone.
afford those kinds of vacations, but I don't see how a family, hell, I couldn't afford to go to Disneyland right now. I mean, it's just,
A family can't go to the movies. A middle class family cannot go to the movie houses. I mean, you think about it. A movie ticket costs $10.
right.
You got 2 adults and 2 kids. So right there, it sets you back, $40. Okay, maybe there's a child discount and it sets you back only $35. But the parking, the gasoline now, of course, and of course, since everything is so spread out, that actually is something that you have to account for, and you get some food because the kids want the popcorn and the soda, and it's way overpriced. I mean, pretty soon it's setting you back $150.
Right.
And for a middle class family, what, doing that, once a week, that would be $600 per month. They can't afford that. And so it's just going to the movies, for crying out loud. Oh, somebody said, Joanna here in chat is saying that movies are $24 in LA. No, that can't be true. I mean, I'm sorry, Joanna,
I think that's probably right. There's
24 bucks for a movie ticket? Holy
there,
cow.
are you familiar with the hamburger chain Five Guys?
Yeah, I'm familiar with them. I don't think I've ever eaten there, but go ahead.
Well, so now if you go in and get a cheeseburger, fries, and drink, you spend $21.
21 bucks
Yeah. Yeah.
for basically a standard, meal?
Yeah. Just
Jesus.
cheeseburger, fries, and drink. It's just so. Like I said, that you go back to asking for the atmosphere. You've got some people are still able to go out and spend that kind of money. They've got disposable income, but others are not, and so they're having.
Sorry, Chad is telling me here $15 for a McDonald's meal. And Joanna, please forgive me, Joanna, for having doubted your word, because other people in chat are telling me that the prices are up there. $15 in Tennessee? Oh no, that's crazy. That's just insane. No wonder the movie business is going out of business. Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole point of the movie business was, numbers, have as many people go in to see a show, not overcharge them so that, oh my God, 32 at Subway for 2 6-inch meals in Nova Scotia. Oh, Jesus,
Yeah.
man,
See, this is
unbelievable.
this economic crisis. This is what people need to understand. This is global. I put up an open thread on my blog 3 weeks ago,
Hmm.
and I'm blessed that I've got quite an international audience,
Hmm.
and I've got people from over 30 countries, and then across the United States, and all continents except Antarctica, and um, everybody was describing what they're facing economically. So it's not confined to just one or two countries. It is global. And
Mm.
we have not seen this kind of phenomena in our lifetime. This
No.
this is going back to the 1930s. There are a few souls left alive who maybe remember that or barely remember that. But that's what we're up against now. We're coming
Jesus.
on a global scale, except in this case, back in the 1930s, go back 90 years, people were a lot more self-sufficient in terms of being able to have some chickens in the yard and get their own eggs and do other. They weren't as dependent upon technology and supply chains to keep them alive.
Yeah.
Now we are.
Yeah.
And those things are so vulnerable that if they get turned off, as they're starting to experience. Frankly, that's what Russia's starting to do to Ukraine: turn off its power supply.
Yep. Yeah. I'm kind of amazed by the way that Kharkov still has electricity, obviously. And do you have any insight to that? I'm assuming that it's because Kharkov is kind of like outside the grid of what the Russians want to target, which is basically Western Ukraine and the
Right.
ability to resupply. And Kharkov is literally just completely out of the loop in that regard. And my thinking is that that's why they're not blowing up the power here. I mean, they've hit it with some strikes, but they've been at specific buildings, and a couple of times we lost power for 6 or 8 hours. It was
Right.
twice that it happened, as a matter of fact. But other than that, we're still with electricity. Can you give me any insight on as to that?
Yeah. No, I'm sorry, I don't. I'm as puzzled as you. I thought, when you're talking about wanting to do the roundtable, I was saying, man, are we going to even? Is he going to even have power?
Yeah, I
You
know.
turn the lights on.
Yeah,
Uh,
no, but I like I said, I've not had no power whatsoever. As far as I know, there are no there's no okay, the street lights are off, okay, all the time, which is kind of like a hassle now because it gets dark like around 5:36.
mhm.
And so people are walking around with flashlights. And it's pretty funny. You see some bobbing light ahead of you and pitch black, right, in the middle of a city, and it's pitch black, and you see somebody bobbing with a light at their feet, and you're like, oh, somebody's coming along. And but other than that, like for instance, I went to the supermarket yesterday. I bought my cigarettes, and they were 75 grivna, which is the exchange rate is if you're selling dollars, it's 39 grivna to the dollar, so it's roughly about a buck 80. But cigarettes have always been cheap here in Ukraine. In
Oh
fact,
yeah.
yeah, when I was living in London, friends of mine would tell me, "Bring back cigarettes. Just bring back a boatload." Okay, yeah, because cigarettes in London are like £10 a pop just
Right.
for one pack. The taxes. But anyway, I bought the cigarettes and I bought beef. I bought an okay cut that cost me. What was it? 250 grivna per kilo. A kilo is 2.2 pounds. 250 grivna is roughly $6 a pound, $6 a kilo, $6.5 a kilo.
Hmm.
I don't. Chat, you tell me if that's reasonable. You know. Oh, $13.66 for a pack of cigarettes in Norway. Ha ha. And let me light a cigarette while I laugh. Sorry, man. Sorry, Norway, bro. But anyway, the global. Ultimately, what I find just incredibly amusing when I hear all these government programs in Germany and the United Kingdom that they're going to give money to people for their electricity needs or heating needs. I'm like, that will not help It is a supply issue. You don't have the energy resources. It's not
Right.
that you don't have the money. You don't have the supply. It's like you're stuck in the Sahara in the middle of the desert, right? And you've got $1 million next to you. What good is that if there's no water? I mean, it doesn't help at all. But they don't seem to get it, I guess.
Yeah, no, it is, again, the disconnect from reality, um, with without understanding the kinds of real economic hardships people are starting to experience.
Yeah.
And it's global, it's not local, and that's why I do not see how the NATO countries and the United States can sustain continued pouring billions of dollars into Ukraine while their own economies start, flaming out.
Yeah.
I don't understand how that works.
No, I don't understand either. And the thing that is, you as a CIA analyst, I'm wondering about your opinion on this. Insofar as Europe is concerned, I'm particularly worried about the first generation migrant population, the population that has come over the last 10 years. They thought that Europe was going to be the land of milk and honey, and they're going to go cold, dark, and hungry this winter. And so the issue is, I wonder if the migrant population is going to cause incredible social unrest.
Yeah, no, well, they've, in the past, I know up in Germany, it was always, you had a problem with the Turkish immigrants that went back to, some of them were loyalists to the PKK.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was sort of anti-Turk. So yeah, I mean, they're definitely going to have a problem because I just saw another major industry in Germany is shutting down half of its operation. So, this is like the lights are gradually going off across the board. And when people no longer have jobs, and I guess in Germany, there's a fairly significant welfare system that people,
Right.
if they lost their job, they're going to get paid. So as long as they're getting paid, there's not going to be any immediate panic. But then it gets back to the point you made. If there's, you can have all the money to buy water, but if there's no water, what are you going to buy? Because
Exactly.
you can't drink currency.
Yeah, exactly. Look, we've been going on for close to 2 hours now, and I think it's time to wind it down. Because the secret to a long life is knowing when it's time to go, and we've had up to about 4,200 concurrent viewers, but it's been rock steady over 4,000 since the very beginning of this show. And of course, it's because of you, Larry. And I want to thank you so much for having come on. Chat, why don't we give a rah to Larry? Why don't you write rah Larry? Let me post it for you. So you all. Oops. Hello.
Yeah, I'm here.
Are you? Yeah. I messed up. I hit the wrong thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
You're very kind. By the way, were you ever a fan of Mercedes Sosa?
Who's Mercedes Sosa? I know the name. What?
She's a folk singer out of Argentina.
She's
sort of she's like the Argentine version of Mama Cass.
Yeah. And by the way, look at chat. The chat loves you, Larry. So, yeah. Thank you so much for coming on. And by the way, chat, I neglected to mention that I swapped some emails while we were talking with Garland Nixon. He was on a train, and so unfortunately, that's why he couldn't join us. But we will definitely have him on. And now that I have his contact information, and thanks, chat, for telling me that he was on, and I'm really flattered that he was listening. We'll definitely have Garland on for an episode. It'll be a lot of fun. But no, about Dolores Sosa, she was the Mama Cass of Argentina.
Yep. Mercedes Sosa. Yeah.
Yeah.
She's got her albums are just sensational. Really, check her out. I think you'll be impressed.
I will. I'm almost positive that I've heard her. Because it's always in the zeitgeist, and I've been to Argentina, God knows how many times. So yeah. Okay, so there you go. Larry is giving you some music recommendation, and of course, you have to go check out his website where he blogs every day. And it's not a lie when I say that just about everybody in the commentary community takes their cues from what Larry writes there on his blog. It's sonar21.com. I pinned the comment in the chat, and the link is in the description below. So go check it out. Larry, thank you so much. Stick around so I can say just a few parting words before you go.
Okay.
And chat, I hope that you enjoyed the broadcast. I most certainly did. And finally, to Phil Girardi, get better soon, and can't wait to have you on. Anytime, you're always welcome. Okay? Chat, thanks so much, and I will see you next time.